I knew something was wrong the second I stepped out of the rideshare and saw the movers. 3 of them stood on the sidewalk in navy shirts, leaning casually against stacks of cardboard boxes. My boxes. I recognized the corner dents, the black tape, the thick marker ink. My name was written across the top in my own handwriting. Lena Parker, the same slanted L I'd had since college. For a split second, my brain rejected the image, tried to rearrange it into something harmless. Maybe a neighbor was moving. Maybe someone borrowed my Sharpie. Maybe this was the wrong building. But the address was right. Meridian Heights. The sun was beating down on the back of my neck, my suitcase still standing upright beside me like I was just another traveler passing through. One of the movers glanced at his clipboard, then at me. "Are you Lena Parker?" he asked, his tone light, almost friendly. When I nodded, he said the words that made the street go quiet around me. "We were told to clear the unit. New owners take the keys today." The world tilted. New owners. My penthouse. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed in my hand. A message from my sister flashed across the screen. "Welcome home. Guess you're homeless now." I stood there on the sidewalk while people walked past, while my life sat in boxes behind strangers, and for the first time in years, I didn't know where I belonged. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the building, at the glass reflecting the afternoon sky, at the balcony where I used to drink my coffee and watch the harbor wake up. I'd lived there for 5 years. Every inch of that space held my routines, my silence, my sense of control, and now I was being told, in broad daylight, that it was gone. "There has to be a mistake," I said finally, more to myself than to the mover. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, we just do what we're told." I swallowed hard and stepped away, my hands shaking as I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. "Did you land?" she asked, already irritated, as if my call was an interruption. "Mom," I said quietly, "why are my things on the sidewalk?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Don't be dramatic, Lena. We did what we had to do." My chest tightened. "Did what?" "We sold the apartment," she said like she was talking about a piece of furniture. "Your sister needed help." "You sold my home," I said. The words sounded strange out loud. "Oh, please," she snapped. "You're one person. You travel all the time. You don't need a penthouse." My father's voice cut in on speaker, calm and firm. This was for the good of the family. The good of the family. I had heard that phrase my entire life. It had justified everything from unwanted advice to decisions made without me. "You didn't even ask me," I said. "That's because we knew you'd overreact," my mother replied. "You always do." Before I could respond, another voice joined the call, bright and unmistakably amused. "So it's true," my sister Mara said. "You really came back to nothing." "Mara," I said, my jaw clenched. "Relax," she laughed. "You'll figure it out. You always do. And honestly, you should be thanking us. Josh and I were drowning." There it was. Josh, her fiancé. The man who never seemed to have a steady job but always had a reason. "You used my apartment to pay his debts?" I asked. "It wasn't just his," she shot back. "And don't act like you're some victim. You have money. You have options. I'm trying to build a family." I closed my eyes. "What did you use to sell it?" I asked. "I never signed anything." Another pause, longer this time. "That document you signed years ago," my father said carefully. "Perfectly legal." My stomach dropped. "What document?" "Don't start," my mother said. "You trusted us back then. Nothing's changed." Everything had changed. I could hear it in the way they avoided the question, in the way my sister stayed quiet for once. "I need to talk to you in person," I said. "There's nothing to discuss," my mother replied. "The sale's done." Mara laughed again, softer this time. "You should probably hurry if you want to grab anything else. The buyers are excited." I ended the call without another word. The movers were waiting, pretending not to listen. One of them gave me a sympathetic look. "Rough situation," he said. "Can you put everything into storage?" I asked. My voice surprised me. It was steady. "Of course." As they began loading the truck, I stepped aside and watched my life disappear box by box. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something colder settle in my chest, something that pushed the panic away and left only clarity. They hadn't panicked. They hadn't acted out of desperation. This had been planned. When the truck pulled away, I was left standing alone with my suitcase and nowhere to go. I checked into the first short stay I could find, a narrow room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. The bed was stiff. The light was harsh. It couldn't have been more different from the space I'd lost. I sat on the edge of the mattress and let the silence wrap around me. My phone buzzed again, a message from my mother. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." I set the phone face down and opened my laptop instead. If they thought I would panic, they were wrong. If they thought I would beg, they didn't know me as well as they believed. Somewhere beneath the shock and the humiliation, a question was forming, sharp and insistent. What exactly had they sold? I logged into my digital vault, the one I'd set up years ago after a lawyer warned me to keep copies of everything important. Trust documents, property records, old medical forms, files I hadn't looked at in years. I opened the folder labeled Meridian Trust, Final. The power of attorney was there, just as I remembered it, medical decisions only. Signed after a surgery when I was vulnerable and grateful for help. I scrolled through it slowly, line by line. Not transferable. No property authority. My breath caught. I opened the trust document next. The penthouse wasn't listed as a simple asset. It was held under specific restrictions. Sale required my direct presence. My signature, no exceptions. I leaned back against the headboard, my heart pounding. They couldn't sell it. Not legally, not the way they had. They assumed I wouldn't check. I thought of my father's voice, confident and dismissive. "Be grateful we handled it for you." I thought of Mara's laughter. Homeless. A crack formed inside me, not of pain, but of understanding. They thought they had won. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. Tomorrow I would verify the sale. Tomorrow I would start asking questions they never expected me to ask. For now, I lay back on the unfamiliar bed, my suitcase still unopened, and let one thought anchor me. They sold the apartment. They just didn't know what it really was. I barely slept that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop working. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my boxes on the sidewalk, my name written in thick black marker, Mara's message looping in my head, homeless now. By morning, the shock had worn off and left something sharper behind. Suspicion. I made coffee with the tiny motel machine and sat at the narrow desk, laptop open, documents spread across the screen. The trust papers from the night before were still there, solid and unambiguous. My penthouse could not be sold without me. That fact alone should have been enough to calm me, but it didn't. Because legal truth and family behavior had never lived in the same world. I opened my email and searched for anything related to the apartment. Sale notices, realtor messages, automated alerts. There was nothing. No listing confirmation. No contract draft. No request for signatures. Not even a courtesy heads up. It was as if the sale had happened in a vacuum, without me ever existing as the owner. That was the first real red flag. I pulled up the county's public real estate records and typed in the property address. Meridian Heights, Unit 32, A. The page loaded slowly, then refreshed. Status sold. I stared at the screen, my fingers cold on the keyboard. The listing date was less than 2 weeks ago. The closing date was yesterday, 48 hours from listing to sale, in a building where units usually sat for months. Worse, the sale price was far below market value. Not a small discount, a desperate one. No buyer with sense would rush a deal like that unless they were being pushed, or unless someone on the other side was desperate to unload it. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, and let the pieces start lining up. The timing, my trip, the silence, the rush. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a maneuver. I grabbed my phone and called the building management office. I'd known the concierge team for years. They knew me, or at least, I thought they did. Meridian Heights, a woman answered. This is Claire. Hi, this is Lena Parker, Unit 32A, I said. I have a question about my apartment. There was a pause. Oh, she said. Yes. We were told you were unavailable. My grip tightened. Unavailable how? Your parents handled the sale, she replied carefully. They said it was best not to disturb you. Best not to disturb you. The phrase landed like a slap. Did anyone try to contact me directly? I asked. Another pause. We were advised not to. I thanked her and ended the call, my chest tight with a mix of anger and disbelief. They hadn't just sold my home. They had erased me from the process, presented me as someone who couldn't be trusted with her own life. I sat there for a long moment staring at the wall. Then I did the one thing I'd been avoiding. I called the buyer. The number was listed on the public record, along with the deed transfer. I hesitated with my thumb over the screen, then pressed dial before I could talk myself out of it. It rang 4 times before a man answered. Hello? Hi, I said, steadying my voice. My name is Lena Parker. I believe you purchased my apartment. Silence stretched on the line. Then a slow exhale. We were wondering when you'd call. That sentence sent a chill down my spine. You were? Yes, he said. I'm Daniel. My wife and we thought something felt off. I closed my eyes. I didn't authorize the sale, I said. I didn't even know it was happening. He didn't sound surprised. Your parents told us you were aware. They said you'd given consent but were emotionally overwhelmed and didn't want to be involved. Emotionally overwhelmed. The words burned. Did they say anything else? They said you were fragile, he admitted quietly. That you didn't handle stress well, that involving you would make things harder. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just theft. This was character assassination. Do you still have the emails? I asked. Yes, he said immediately. We kept everything, and the notary appointment was rushed. Your parents insisted on handling all the paperwork. I swallowed. Would you be willing to share those messages? Of course, he said. We never wanted to be part of something like this. We ended the call, and I sat there in the motel room, staring at the blank wall as the reality settled in. They hadn't just lied to me. They had lied about me, painted me as unstable, so no one would question why I wasn't present. I thought back to all the times my mother had called me sensitive, to my father telling me I worried too much, to Mara rolling her eyes whenever I pushed back. They had been laying this groundwork for years. I opened my laptop again and waited. The emails arrived 10 minutes later. I read them slowly, each one confirming what my gut already knew. My mother writing to the realtor, asking for speed. My father reassuring the buyers that I was incapable of handling legal matters. A message that made my hands shake as I read it twice. She doesn't need to be involved. She won't understand the urgency. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms into my eyes until stars bloomed behind them. They didn't just take my home. They took my voice and handed strangers a version of me that suited their needs. My phone buzzed, a text from Mara. Why are you talking to the buyers? I didn't respond. Another message followed, this one from my father. This is getting out of hand. We'll explain everything when you calm down. Calm down. The family favorite. I set the phone aside and stood up, pacing the small room. The more I looked at the evidence, the clearer the pattern became. The rushed sale, the low price, the silence, the lies about my mental state, the use of a document that was never meant for this. This wasn't about helping my sister in a moment of crisis. This was about control, about deciding my life for me because they believed they had the right. I sat back down and pulled up my bank app without thinking, more out of habit than intention. A list of transactions filled the screen. At first glance, everything looked normal: bills, transfers, familiar numbers. Then my eyes caught something else. Small withdrawals, regular, always under the amount that triggered alerts, labeled with notes like family help or temporary support. My heart skipped. I hadn't come here to look at my finances. But suddenly, I couldn't look away. I scrolled back. 1 month, 3 months, 6. The same pattern repeated. Quiet, consistent. Easy to miss if you trusted the people who had access. A cold realization crept over me. They didn't sell my penthouse because they needed money that week. They sold it because they had been bleeding money for a long time. I closed the app and leaned back, my pulse steady but heavy. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Somewhere outside, a car horn blared, life continuing as if nothing had changed. I reached for my phone and typed one message. Not to my family, to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Are you available? I think I need legal advice. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I didn't know how ugly it would get. But one thing was certain. They hadn't won. They had just made their first mistake. The morning light crept through the thin motel curtains, pale and unforgiving, and for the first time since I landed, I didn't feel disoriented when I opened my eyes. I felt alert. The emails from the buyers were still open on my laptop, their words burned into my memory. Emotionally overwhelmed, fragile, won't understand the urgency. I replayed those phrases as I sat up in bed, letting the anger sharpen instead of consume me. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't confused. I was focused. I showered quickly, pulled my hair back, and made myself sit at the desk again. If they were willing to lie about me so easily, then the truth wasn't going to reveal itself all at once. I would have to trace it, piece by piece. I started with the building. Meridian Heights had always felt like a quiet constant in my life. Familiar faces at the desk, a sense of privacy. A place where people respected boundaries. Or at least, I thought they did. I called again, this time asking to speak to the property manager directly. "This is Richard," a man answered, his voice professional but guarded. "Richard, this is Lena Parker. I own Unit 32A, I said, choosing my words carefully. I need to understand exactly what information was shared about me during the sale. There was a pause long enough to tell me he was choosing his response. "We were told you were unavailable due to personal reasons," he said finally. "Your parents handled everything." "Personal reasons," I repeated. "Did anyone say I was unwell?" Another pause, shorter this time. "They mentioned you were under a lot of stress," he said, "that it would be better not to involve you directly." Better? For whom? "Did anyone verify that with me?" I asked. "No," he admitted. "We assumed family authority." I thanked him and ended the call, my jaw tight. Family authority. It was astonishing how easily that phrase erased ownership, consent, autonomy. All the years I'd worked to build something stable for myself, and one narrative from my parents had undone it in the eyes of strangers. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, letting the anger move through me without drowning me. They hadn't just excluded me, they had defined me in a way that made exclusion seem reasonable. That realization hurt more than losing the apartment. My phone buzzed. Another message from Mara. "You're being dramatic. You're embarrassing all of us." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new tab and searched my own name. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't prepared for the quiet humiliation of realizing how little of my real self existed outside my own head. Public records were sparse, employment history clean, no scandals, no instability, nothing that matched the story my family had told, which meant they'd invented it. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a slow, simmering rage. They hadn't panicked and lied in the moment. They'd reached for a narrative they knew would work, because they'd used it on me my whole life. Sensitive, overwhelmed, too much. I thought back to my 20s, to the first job I took in another city, the way my mother had worried out loud about whether I could handle the pressure. to my father's habit of stepping in whenever a decision felt uncomfortable, to Mara laughing it off whenever I pushed back, telling me I took things too seriously. This wasn't new. The sale was just the boldest expression of it yet. I closed the browser and reopened the emails from Daniel and his wife. I read them again, slower this time, noticing details I'd missed before. The urgency, the insistence, the way my parents framed the sale as an act of rescue, not theft. We're just trying to stabilize the situation. Lena would want that. I scoffed softly. They had no idea what I wanted. They had never asked. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Daniel again. "Hi," he said gently. "I just wanted to check in. My wife and I talked, and we feel awful about this." "I appreciate you calling," I said. "I know this isn't easy." "There's something else," he continued. "During the signing, your father kept saying things like, 'She'll be fine, she always bounces back.' It struck me as odd. It struck me as familiar." "Did the notary verify anything with me?" I asked. "No," he said. "Your parents insisted it wasn't necessary. They said you trusted them completely." I closed my eyes. Trusted. Past tense. After we hung up, I sat there in silence, letting the pattern crystallize. Every step of this had relied on one assumption: that I would remain quiet, that I would accept whatever explanation they offered, that I would prioritize peace over truth as I always had. But peace built on erasure wasn't peace at all. I pulled up my calendar and scrolled back over the past year. Trips, meetings, conferences, days when I'd been out of town, unreachable by design. It didn't take long to notice how often those dates lined up with the withdrawals I'd seen the night before. A chill ran through me. They hadn't just waited for an opportunity. They had used my independence against me. I remembered my mother telling me how proud she was of my career, my father praising my discipline. At the time, it felt like validation. Now, it felt like inventory. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my father. "We need to talk. This is spiraling." I stared at the message, then locked the screen without responding. For the first time, I understood something I'd never let myself see before. This wasn't about helping Mara. It wasn't even about money. It was about preserving a system where I absorbed the cost so everyone else could avoid it. I stood up and paced the room, my thoughts moving faster now. If they were willing to lie to buyers, to building management, to notaries, then the truth wasn't just hidden, it was buried under layers of justification, and buried things don't stay buried forever. I sat back down and opened my bank statements again, this time with purpose. I exported the last 12 months into a spreadsheet and began highlighting transactions. Small amounts, consistent intervals, transfers that never came with follow-up or repayment. By the time I reached the bottom of the list, my hands were cold. This wasn't help. This was extraction. I thought of every time I'd brushed off a missing amount as a mistake. Every time I'd told myself family didn't keep score. Every time I'd chosen not to look too closely because looking felt like betrayal. The irony nearly made me laugh. My phone vibrated with another message from Mara. "You don't understand what we're dealing with. Josh is under a lot of pressure." Josh. There it was again. I stared at his name on the screen, the way it slid so easily into conversations about sacrifice and obligation. I didn't know much about him beyond what Mara chose to show: charming, restless, always between opportunities, and always in need of something. I didn't reply. Instead, I typed his name into the search bar. What came back wasn't dramatic. No headlines, no scandals, just a trail of half-finished things, short-term jobs, address changes, a civil case from years ago settled quietly, nothing illegal on the surface, nothing reassuring either. I leaned back, my heart beating steadily now, not wildly. This wasn't about proving anyone evil. It was about seeing clearly, and clarity was settling in fast. I closed the laptop and looked around the motel room at the neutral walls and temporary furniture. This wasn't home, but for the first time since I landed, I didn't feel homeless either. I felt awake. They thought I wouldn't question the story they told. They thought I'd be too busy cleaning up their mess to notice how it was made. They thought wrong. because the more I uncovered, the more obvious it became. This wasn't one bad decision, it was a pattern, and patterns leave trails. The realization settled in slowly, like cold water rising around my ankles, then my knees, then my chest. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't panic. Someone had lied, deliberately, to make all of this happen. I sat at the motel desk with my laptop open, the morning half gone without me noticing. The spreadsheet from the night before glowed on the screen, rows of dates and numbers lined up with brutal neatness. Small withdrawals, predictable timing, and now, layered on top of that, the sale itself. Too fast, too cheap, too clean. Nothing about it made sense unless it was designed not to. I pulled up the public listing again and studied it more carefully. The agent's name, the brokerage, the marketing photos. They were generic, rushed, clearly recycled from older listings. No staging, no open house, no attempt to maximize value. In a building like Meridian Heights, that alone was suspicious. My parents hadn't been trying to get the best price. They'd been trying to get it done. I closed the listing and stared at the wall across from me, the paint chipped near the baseboard. For years I had told myself my family was chaotic but well-meaning, that they crossed boundaries because they loved too much, not because they wanted control. But love didn't look like this. Love didn't erase someone from their own life. I picked up the phone and called the building again, this time asking for security. "This is Andre," a man answered, his voice cautious. "Hi, Andre. This is Lena Parker from 32A. I need to ask you something off the record." He hesitated. "Okay. Who was accessing my unit before the sale?" There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Your parents," he said, multiple times, with contractors, with the realtor. "Was I ever listed as restricted access?" I asked. "Yes," he replied slowly. "We were told not to let you in unscheduled, that it might upset you." My throat tightened. "Upset me how?" "They said you weren't in a good place emotionally." I thanked him and ended the call before my voice could give anything away. They hadn't just lied to buyers. They hadn't just lied to management. They had instructed people to treat me like a liability, like someone who needed to be managed instead of respected. I stood up abruptly, pacing the narrow room. My hands curled into fists, then relaxed. Anger would be useful later. Right now, I needed clarity. I opened my email and searched for the realtor's name. Olivia Marsh. The messages were short, polite, professional, and every single one was addressed to my parents. I wasn't copied. I wasn't mentioned as a participant. I was spoken about, not spoken to. One email made my stomach drop. "She doesn't need to be involved. We're acting in her best interest." That line wasn't written for convenience. It was written for justification. I leaned back in the chair, my pulse slow and steady. They hadn't been scrambling. They had been constructing a narrative, one where I was absent by choice, one where my silence looked like consent. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from Mara. I let it ring. A minute later, a text appeared. "Why are you doing this? You're making everything worse." I almost laughed. Worse for whom? Instead of responding, I did something I should have done days ago. I called Olivia Marsh. She answered on the third ring, her voice wary but polite. "This is Olivia." "Hi, Olivia, my name is Lena Parker. You handled the sale of my apartment." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Oh." That single syllable told me everything. "Yes," she continued carefully, "I was told you were aware of the sale." "I wasn't," I said evenly, "and I'd like to understand why everyone was instructed not to involve me." She exhaled. "Your parents were very clear. They said contacting you would complicate things." "Did they say why?" I asked. "They said you were emotionally overwhelmed," she admitted, "that you didn't handle pressure well." I closed my eyes for a second. Hearing it out loud from a stranger stripped it of any lingering ambiguity. "Did that concern you?" I asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "It did. But they presented a power of attorney. Everything looked authorized. There it was again. That document. The one meant for hospital rooms, not real estate deals. Did they rush you? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. They wanted the sale closed as quickly as possible. They accepted the first offer. Even though it was low? Yes. Did you ask why? I pressed. They said speed mattered more than value. I thanked her and ended the call, my chest tight but my thoughts crystal clear. Speed mattered because delay meant risk. Risk meant questions. Questions meant me. They hadn't sold my penthouse because they needed money immediately. They sold it because they couldn't afford for me to find out what they'd been doing. I sank back into the chair, staring at the ceiling fan as it rattled softly overhead. Every memory I had of my family rearranged itself under this new light. The urgency, the secrecy, the dismissiveness. It wasn't chaotic, it was calculated. My phone vibrated again, this time a voicemail notification from my father. I didn't listen to it. I already knew what it would say. That I was overreacting, that I was making trouble, that this could all go away if I just calmed down. That was the trap. Calm down, let it pass, let them handle it. I wasn't falling into it again. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Evidence. I dragged in emails, screenshots, public records, notes from my calls. Every piece of this puzzle went into one place. As I worked, another realization crept in, quieter but more disturbing than the rest. They hadn't just wanted my money. They had wanted my compliance. By painting me as unstable, they justified every step they took. To themselves, to others, maybe even to the law. If I was too emotional to be involved, then my absence wasn't theft, it was protection. That lie hurt more than anything else. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed my objections to keep the peace, all the times I'd let them speak for me because it seemed easier. I had trained them, without meaning to believe I would always stay silent. That training had ended the moment I stepped off that rideshare. I checked my bank app again, scrolling through the withdrawals with a new lens. The dates aligned eerily well with moments I'd been distracted. Conferences, flights, long work days. Times when I trusted that nothing would go wrong because family was handling it. My stomach twisted. This hadn't started with the penthouse. The penthouse was the final move, the clean exit. I closed the app and stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. I looked tired, older than I'd felt a week ago. But I didn't look broken. I looked alert. My phone buzzed again, another text from Mara. If you keep digging, you're going to regret it. That one did make me smile. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything. People who were innocent didn't threaten. People who had nothing to hide didn't panic when questions were asked. I typed a response, then deleted it. I didn't need to say anything. Not yet. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Samantha Blake, attorney, the woman who had insisted I create the trust in the first place. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment. Calling her meant crossing a line I'd avoided my entire adult life. It meant choosing truth over family harmony, consequences over comfort. I pressed dial. She answered on the second ring. Lena? Yes, I said. My voice was steady. I need your help. My family sold my penthouse while I was out of state. There was a pause on the line, then a sharp inhale. Do not talk to them anymore, she said immediately. Not one word. I closed my eyes, a strange sense of relief washing through me. Send me everything you have, she continued. And Lena, this isn't just a family dispute, this is fraud. I hung up and sat there, the motel room suddenly too quiet. They had built this on lies, on silence, on the assumption that I would back down. They were wrong. And the moment they realized it, everything was going to change. I didn't go looking for proof that morning. I went looking for reassurance. I opened my banking app the way I always did, half awake, expecting the familiar comfort of numbers that made sense. Rent paid, utilities scheduled, savings untouched. For years, that screen had been my quiet proof that at least one part of my life was stable. Instead, I felt my stomach tighten. At first, nothing looked wrong. The balance was where I expected it to be. No giant red flags, no dramatic withdrawals. That was how they'd designed it. Small numbers never trigger panic. Small numbers are easy to forgive. I scrolled back 1 month, then 2, then 3. That's when I saw the pattern. Tiny withdrawals, spaced just far enough apart to look harmless. 200 here, 250 there, always under the threshold where my bank sent alerts. Always labeled with something familiar: family help, temporary support, emergency. Emergency was my favorite lie. Emergency implied urgency. It implied necessity. It implied gratitude. My fingers hovered over the screen as I scrolled further back. 6 months. 9. A year. The same rhythm repeated itself with unsettling precision. I felt a cold wave wash through me. Not panic, not shock, but recognition. This wasn't sloppiness. This was strategy. I exported the last 18 months of transactions into a spreadsheet and opened it on my laptop. One by one, I highlighted every transfer tied to those labels. When I was done, the screen glowed with yellow marks like a warning sign I'd been ignoring for far too long. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. They hadn't taken everything at once because they didn't need to. They'd taken it slowly, quietly, counting on my trust to do the rest. I thought back to the first time my mother had asked for help, just this once. Mara was behind on something. Josh had hit a rough patch. It would only be temporary. They'd pay me back, they never did, and I never asked. Because families don't keep score. That was the rule I'd been taught. That was the rule I'd lived by. And that was the rule they had weaponized. I leaned forward again and began sorting the data by recipient. That's when I saw his name. Josh Henderson. Not on every transfer. Not even most of them. But enough. Enough to be deliberate, enough to be undeniable. Sometimes the money went directly to him. Sometimes it went through a second account before landing somewhere else. Credit cards, online lenders, payment processors I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. This wasn't just my sister's debt. This was a shared ecosystem. A web of obligations and avoidance that my parents had been quietly feeding with my money. I clicked on one payment processor and opened the details. Gambling platform, legal but aggressive, high fees, the kind of place people didn't go once by accident. I closed the tab slowly. They hadn't been rescuing Mara from a bad month. They'd been propping up a lifestyle that was collapsing under its own weight. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We need to talk before this goes too far." Too far. The irony was almost funny. I didn't respond. Instead, I scrolled further back. The earliest withdrawal appeared just over a year ago. Around the same time I'd taken on a new project at work. Longer hours, more travel, less attention to my personal accounts. Perfect timing. I felt something settle deep in my chest then. Not anger, not grief. Something colder, something clearer. This wasn't help. This was extraction. They hadn't asked. They hadn't warned me. They hadn't even told me after the fact. They'd simply decided that what was mine was available. That my stability was expendable as long as theirs remained intact. I thought of the penthouse again. Of how easily they'd sold it. How little concern they'd shown for the price. It wasn't desperation, it was efficiency. The sale wasn't the beginning, it was the end. The final move in a long process designed to solve a problem they'd been hiding from me for over a year. I stood up and paced the motel room, my footsteps muffled by cheap carpet. Every memory replayed itself differently now. Every conversation took on a new meaning. The urgency in my mother's voice, the defensiveness in my father's. Mara's entitlement disguised as vulnerability. I stopped pacing and sat back down, my hands steady. I opened the app settings and scrolled until I found it. Authorized access. A secondary user. My mother's name. I stared at it for a long time. I remembered exactly when I'd added her, after my surgery years ago. I'd been groggy, grateful, trusting. She'd offered to help with bills while I recovered, just in case. We never removed it. Why would we? She was my mother. The realization burned. They hadn't hacked anything. They hadn't broken in. They'd walked through an open door I'd left unlocked because I believed love was reason enough. I removed her access without ceremony. No confirmation message. No alert sent to her phone. Just a quiet click, and it was done. For the first time in months, the bleeding stopped. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mara. "Why are you checking accounts?" "That's invasive." I laughed out loud, a short, humorless sound that echoed in the small room. Invasive. Coming from the person who'd helped herself to my home. I typed a response, then erased it. She didn't deserve an explanation. None of them did. Instead, I opened a new document and began listing dates. Withdrawals, locations, notes, patterns. By the time I finished, my hands were cold, but my mind was sharp. This wasn't an emotional betrayal. It was a financial one. Documentable, traceable, illegal in more ways than one. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, then answered. "Lena," a woman's voice said. Calm, controlled, familiar. "It's Samantha Blake." I exhaled slowly. "I was just organizing everything." "Good," she replied. "Because what you're describing isn't just inappropriate, it's systematic financial abuse." Hearing it labeled made my throat tighten. "I suspected as much," I said. She paused. "How far back does it go?" "Over a year," I answered. "Small amounts, consistent." "That's intentional," she said. "It avoids scrutiny, and it establishes a pattern." A pattern, that word again. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "You don't confront them, you don't warn them, you let me handle this." I closed my eyes. "They'll panic." "They already are," she replied. "And panic makes people sloppy." After we hung up, I sat in silence, letting the weight of it all settle. My family hadn't just crossed a line. They'd erased it. They'd built an entire system around the assumption that I would never look too closely. They were wrong. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from my father. "You're hurting your sister." I stared at the words until they blurred. No, I thought. I stopped protecting her from consequences. I set the phone face down and leaned back, staring at the dim ceiling. They didn't cross a line. They erased it. And now, whether they liked it or not, I was going to redraw every boundary they had ever pretended didn't exist. Josh Henderson's name wouldn't leave my screen. I didn't notice it at first, not consciously. It sat there between transactions like a background hum you only hear once the room goes quiet. A transfer routed through an unfamiliar account. A payment reference that didn't quite match the others. JH, urgent. JH, short term. JH, bridge. Bridge to what, exactly? I sat at the motel desk with my laptop open, coffee long gone cold beside me, scrolling back through the spreadsheet I'd built the night before. I filtered by recipient, by memo, by routing number. And there it was again. Josh's name, tucked neatly into the machinery of my family's finances. He wasn't just benefiting. He was embedded. My chest tightened, not with rage, but with something colder. Curiosity sharpened into suspicion, and suspicion demanded answers. Josh had always existed on the edge of my life, Mara's fiancé, the charming presence at holidays, the man who talked big and delivered very little. He was always between jobs, always on the verge of something better, always one opportunity away from stability. That was how Mara framed it. That was how my parents repeated it. I had accepted that story because it was easier than questioning it. I opened a new browser window and typed his full name into the search bar. The results weren't dramatic. No criminal records, no viral scandals, just fragments, short-term employment histories, a string of addresses that never lasted more than a year, a civil lawsuit from several years back, settled quietly and sealed, debt-related, credit obligations, nothing illegal, nothing reassuring. I clicked deeper. The lawsuit named a cosigner, my mother. My breath stalled. I stared at the screen, rereading the line until it burned into my mind. It wasn't speculation. It was documented. Years ago, before Josh was even engaged to Mara, my parents had already stepped in to clean up his mess. This wasn't a recent crisis. This was a pattern. I closed the browser and leaned back, pressing my fingers into my temples. The image of Josh shifted in my mind, losing its soft edges. He wasn't just unlucky. He wasn't just struggling. He was familiar with being rescued, comfortable with it. And my family had made me his safety net without ever telling me. I thought back to every conversation where Mara had mentioned money, the urgency, the tears, the promises that things would be different after the wedding. I remembered how quickly my parents jumped in to defend Josh whenever I asked questions. He's under a lot of pressure. He means well. He's trying. Trying had become a shield, one that deflected accountability and redirected cost. My phone buzzed with a message from Mara. "Josh says you're overreacting. This isn't what you think." I stared at the screen for a long moment. This wasn't about what I thought anymore. This was about what the numbers said. I scrolled further through the spreadsheet and highlighted every transaction connected to accounts Josh had access to. When I totaled them, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just thousands. It was tens of thousands, spread out in a way that avoided detection but accumulated relentlessly. They hadn't been saving him. They'd been sustaining him. I stood up and paced the room, the cheap carpet muffling my steps. The motel walls felt closer than they had before, like the truth was taking up space where denial used to live. Josh wasn't a side character in this story. He was a beneficiary, and beneficiaries don't stay passive when their lifeline is threatened. As if summoned by the thought, my phone rang. Josh's name lit up the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told me this call mattered. Not because he deserved my attention, but because I needed to hear him without the filter of Mara or my parents. I answered. "Hey, Lena," he said, his voice smooth, measured. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I replied evenly. There was a pause, brief but telling. "Look, things have gotten blown out of proportion. We're all stressed. Let's just slow down and figure this out like adults." Like adults? The phrase almost made me laugh. "Figure what out?" I asked. "The part where my apartment was sold without my consent, or the part where my money's been quietly rerouted to cover your debts?" Silence. Then a sigh. I didn't want it to come out like this. That was all the confirmation I needed. "How long?" I asked. "Lena." "How long?" I repeated. Another pause. Longer this time. "It started before the engagement," he admitted. "But your parents offered to help. They said you'd understand." My jaw clenched. Understand what? "That family takes care of its own," he said. "That you've always been strong, that you'd land on your feet." There it was. The logic laid bare. My strength, my stability, my independence weren't admired. They were exploited. "You never asked me," I said. "No," he replied quietly. "We didn't think you'd say yes." I closed my eyes. The honesty finally offered felt like acid. "And the wedding," I continued. "That was supposed to fix this, wasn't it?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "It was supposed to buy us time." Time. Not change, not accountability. Just more time to keep the system running. I ended the call without another word. My hands were steady as I set the phone down. Whatever shock I might have felt had already passed. In its place was clarity. Josh hadn't manipulated my family into this. They had invited him into it, protected him, enabled him. They built this together. I opened my laptop again and began adding another layer to the evidence file. Josh's financial history, the lawsuit, the transaction pathways, the dates that lined up with his job gaps and spending spikes. The picture sharpened with every click. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from my mother. "Please don't talk to Josh without us. You're misunderstanding his situation." I didn't respond. Another message followed from my father. "He's part of the family now. We protect family. Protect." That word had lost all meaning. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of it all settle. My family hadn't been manipulated into making bad choices. They had chosen convenience over honesty, control over consent, and silence over respect. And Josh had thrived in that environment. I thought of Mara, of the way she'd always positioned herself as the one in need, the one who couldn't possibly handle consequences. I wondered how much of that was learned and how much was cultivated, how often my parents had stepped in before she ever felt the ground shift beneath her feet. My phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail notification from Josh. I didn't listen. I didn't need to hear him justify himself any further. I already knew the truth. This wasn't my sister's crisis. This was his lifestyle. And my family had decided it was my responsibility to fund it. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the thin curtain aside. The parking lot below was quiet, the sky washed in late afternoon light. Life was continuing, indifferent to the collapse happening inside me. I felt strangely calm. This was the moment where pity would have pulled me backward, where guilt would have made me soften, where fear of breaking the family apart would have convinced me to compromise. Instead, I felt resolve settle in. I wasn't going to negotiate, I wasn't going to reason. I wasn't going to plead for understanding from people who had never offered me the same courtesy. I picked up my phone and sent one message. Not to Josh, not to Mara, to Samantha. Josh is involved, deeply. I have documentation. Her response came quickly. Good. That confirms intent. Stop all direct contact. From here on, everything goes through me. I exhaled slowly, the tension easing just enough to let me breathe. I looked back at the spreadsheet one last time, at the web of transactions and choices and lies. It was ugly. It was overwhelming. But it was also complete. They hadn't betrayed me alone. They had done it as a unit. And now that I could see the full shape of it, I knew exactly what had to happen next. I stared at the ceiling long after the sun went down, the motel room quiet except for the hum of traffic outside, and for the first time since this began, everything finally made sense. Not in a comforting way, in a precise, almost clinical way. My laptop sat open on the bed, documents spread across the screen like pieces of a map I could no longer unsee. The trust papers, the sale records, the bank statements. Josh's name threaded through it all like a vein carrying poison. When I looked at it as a whole, there was no chaos anymore, no confusion, just design. This hadn't been a moment of desperation. It had been a system, and systems don't collapse unless someone applies pressure. I rolled onto my side and reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I had been avoiding for days. Samantha Blake, attorney. The woman who had insisted years ago that I protect myself even from the people I loved most. At the time, I'd smiled politely and assumed I'd never need her again. I hesitated with my thumb over the screen, not because I doubted what I needed to do, but because I knew what calling her meant. Once I crossed that line, there would be no pretending this was just a family disagreement, no retreat into silence. No going back to the version of myself who absorbed everything to keep the peace. I pressed dial. She answered on the second ring. Lena? Yes, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. I need your help. There was a brief pause, then the tone in her voice shifted. Tell me what happened. They sold my penthouse while I was out of state, I said, without my consent, and I think they've been draining my accounts for over a year. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She didn't soften her response. Do not talk to them anymore, she said immediately. Not your parents, not your sister, not her fiancé, no one. I closed my eyes, relief washing through me. Okay. Send me everything you have, she continued. Tonight, every document, every email, every transaction. And Lena, I need you to understand something. What? I asked. This isn't a misunderstanding, she said. This is fraud. The word landed with weight, but not shock. I had already reached it on my own. Hearing it confirmed felt like a door clicking shut behind me. After we hung up, I stayed where I was for a long moment, phone still warm in my hand. The room felt smaller, but my chest felt lighter. The burden of figuring this out alone had been heavier than I realized. I spent the next few hours uploading files, labeling folders, creating timelines. I didn't rush, I didn't skim, I worked carefully, deliberately, like someone assembling a case instead of a plea. By the time I finished, my inbox chimed with a reply from Samantha. "Got everything. This is serious. We'll talk in the morning." I set the laptop aside and finally lay back, exhaustion creeping in around the edges of my resolve. Sleep came in fragments, but when I woke, it wasn't with panic, it was with purpose. My phone was already buzzing when morning light filtered through the curtains. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails stacking up like a countdown, my mother first. "Why won't you answer your phone?" Then my father, "You're making a huge mistake." Then Mara, "Josh is freaking out, call me now." I stared at the screen, my pulse steady. This was new, not the messages themselves, but the urgency beneath them. The shift in tone, the crack in their certainty. They knew something had changed. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I made coffee, showered, and sat back down at the desk to wait for Samantha's call. It came just after 9. "I've reviewed the documents," she said without preamble, "and I want you to listen very carefully." I am. "The power of attorney they used does not grant them authority to sell real property," she said. "If your signature was applied without your knowledge, that's forgery. The misrepresentation to buyers and the building adds another layer, and the financial withdrawals—" She paused. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's long-term financial exploitation," she finished. "Intentional, structured, and provable." I let out a slow breath. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "we stop them from doing any more damage." She outlined the steps calmly: an emergency filing, a request to freeze the proceeds of the sale, formal notices, subpoenas if necessary. She didn't sugarcoat anything. This would get ugly, it would get public, and my family would not take it quietly. "They will accuse you of betrayal," she warned. "They will say you're tearing the family apart. They will guilt you, threaten you, and try to scare you into backing down." I thought of Mara's message. "Josh is freaking out." "I can handle that," I said. "Good," she replied, "because the most important thing you can do right now is stay silent. Let me speak for you." After we hung up, I sat back and let the quiet fill the room. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting. I was waiting. The messages kept coming. My mother's tone shifted first, from irritation to concern. "Please call me. I'm worried about you." Then my father tried a different angle. "This doesn't have to go further. We can fix this privately." Finally, "Mara, you're making everything worse. You're going to ruin us." I read each one without responding, noticing the way their language changed as the hours passed. The confidence drained away. The authority dissolved into fear. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were asking why I wasn't cooperating. That told me everything. By afternoon, Samantha sent another message. "We're filing the first motion tomorrow morning. After that, all communication goes through me." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair, a strange calm settling over me. Filing meant commitment. It meant the law stepping in where I never had been allowed to. It meant boundaries, enforced by something stronger than guilt. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Josh. I ignored the call. A minute later, a text followed. "Let's talk like adults. We can work something out." I almost smiled. Work something out meant keep the system running, keep the money flowing, keep the consequences at bay. I didn't reply. The final message of the day came from my father. "If you push this, you'll lose your inheritance." I stared at the words until they stopped feeling sharp. There it was. The last card. The one they had always held over me without ever saying it out loud. My value, reduced to what I might one day receive if I stayed in line. I set the phone down gently and let the silence stretch. Inheritance wasn't leverage if it came at the cost of my autonomy. Money wasn't security if it required my erasure. And family wasn't family if love only existed when I was useful. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I didn't feel afraid of what was coming. I felt anchored. They had taught me to stay quiet, to absorb, to endure. The law had taught me something different. I didn't have to explain myself anymore. I didn't have to negotiate my worth. I didn't have to sacrifice truth for harmony. I turned off the light and closed my eyes, knowing that by morning the process would begin. Not a confrontation, not a plea, a reckoning. And this time, I wouldn't be the one breaking under it. The first full day after Samantha filed the paperwork was the day my family realized I wasn't begging anymore. I woke to my phone vibrating nonstop on the motel nightstand, the screen lighting up again and again until it felt like a strobe. Missed calls stacked on top of each other. Messages piling up so fast I couldn't read them all at once. My mother, my father, Mara, Josh. Over and over, like if they just tried hard enough I would break. I didn't. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater kick on and off, and noticed something strange. My chest wasn't tight, my stomach wasn't in knots. The familiar guilt, the one that usually rushed in the second my parents sounded upset, was nowhere to be found. I picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages slowly. My mother's came first. "Please call us. Something's wrong." That alone told me everything. Something wasn't wrong for them until they lost control. A second message followed, more frantic. "We need to talk before this gets out of hand." Out of hand. As if I were the one who'd sold a home that didn't belong to me. As if I were the one who'd spent over a year siphoning money from someone who trusted me. I set the phone down without replying and went to make coffee. By the time I sat at the desk with my mug warming my hands, the tone of the messages had already shifted. My father tried next. "This is not how families handle problems." Then another. "You're embarrassing us." I almost laughed. Embarrassment mattered now. Not theft, not fraud, not betrayal. Just how it looked. I opened my laptop and pulled up the case folder Samantha had shared with me. The motion had been filed. The clock was ticking. There was nothing for me to do now except stay quiet and let the process move. That silence was doing more damage than any argument ever could. The phone buzzed again, this time with a FaceTime request from Mara. I watched her name flash across the screen, her photo frozen mid-smile, and felt a wave of something close to pity. She had always relied on immediacy, on emotion, on getting to me before I could think. I declined the call. Seconds later, a voice message came through. I listened, against my better judgment. Her voice was sharp, breathless. "What are you doing? Do you have any idea how bad this is? You're ruining my future, Lena. Josh says this could turn criminal. Do you want that on your conscience?" Criminal. There it was. Not denial, not outrage. Fear. I deleted the message and didn't respond. Another notification popped up, this one from Josh. "Let's talk. This doesn't have to go further." I stared at the words for a long moment. When he said further, what he meant was public. Consequences, a record, exposure. He followed it with another message almost immediately. "We can fix this quietly. I'll pay you back, after the wedding. Just give us time." Time. That word again. Always time. Time to hide. Time to delay. Time to keep things just barely together. I locked the phone and pushed it aside. An hour later, Samantha called. "They're calling you non-stop, aren't they?" she said, not bothering to ask. "Yes," I replied. "Good," she said calmly. "That means the filing reached them." I exhaled. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the court's response," she said. "And we document everything. Messages, voicemails, threats, promises. It all helps." Threats. I glanced at the phone on the desk. "They're not threatening yet." "They will," she said. "They always do when they realize guilt isn't working." After the call, I sat there listening to the sounds of the motel, doors opening and closing, a child laughing somewhere down the hall. Life continuing in small, ordinary ways while mine was being dismantled and rebuilt at the same time. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother, and the message was longer. "Eva, sweetheart, please stop this. You're misunderstanding everything. We only did what we did because we love you and your sister. You're tearing the family apart and people are starting to ask questions. Think about what this will do to all of us." I read it twice. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she say she was sorry. Not once did she acknowledge what they had done. It was all about the family, the image, the damage to them. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, a quiet realization settling over me. They didn't fear losing me. They feared losing access. By early afternoon, the messages had escalated. My father called 3 times in 10 minutes. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail. I listened to it once. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You're being manipulated by lawyers who don't care about you. Call us now before you make a mistake you can't undo." Manipulated. As if I hadn't spent weeks digging through evidence myself. As if I were still the daughter who could be redirected with a stern tone and a warning. I deleted the voicemail. Then came the message that finally stripped away any remaining illusion. "If you keep pushing this, you'll lose your inheritance." I stared at the screen, my heart steady, my hands calm. So that was it. The last lever. The one they'd never pulled outright before but had always implied. Stay in line, and you'll be taken care of. Step out, and you'll be cut off. I felt something inside me settle, solid and unmovable. Inheritance meant nothing if it came with conditions that erased me. Money wasn't security if it required silence in the face of abuse. I forwarded the message to Samantha without comment. Her reply came a few minutes later. "Thank you, that's very useful." The rest of the day passed in waves of noise and quiet. Calls that went unanswered. Messages that grew shorter, more frantic. Mara tried again in the evening, this time with a softer tone. "Please, just talk to me. We can figure something out." Figure something out meant undoing consequences. Rewriting reality. Asking me to absorb the cost one more time so she wouldn't have to. I didn't reply. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the phone finally went quiet. Not completely, but enough. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall, listening to my own breathing. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't bracing myself for the next emotional blow. I felt detached, grounded, clear. My phone buzzed one last time that night, a text from Samantha. "They're scared, and for good reason." The court responded faster than expected. "We're close." I smiled, just slightly, the expression unfamiliar on my face. They had always believed my silence meant weakness, that my willingness to smooth things over meant I would never hold my ground. They were wrong. As I turned off the light and lay back, the darkness didn't feel threatening. It felt protective, like a pause before something irreversible. They had taken my home. They had drained my accounts. They had called me dramatic, unstable, homeless. And now, stripped of my cooperation, they were unraveling. They didn't realize it yet, but the worst part wasn't what the court would do to them. It was the fact that I was no longer afraid of their anger. And once that fear was gone, they had nothing left to use against me. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, the kind of sterile calm that pretends nothing terrible ever happens inside its walls. I sat on the hard wooden bench outside the courtroom with my hands folded in my lap, watching people walk past as if this were just another Tuesday. Attorneys with briefcases, couples whispering to each other. A man in a wrinkled suit pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. Life. Moving forward, unconcerned with the fact that my family was about to be legally exposed. Samantha sat beside me, calm and unreadable, a thick folder balanced on her knee. She hadn't said much since we arrived. She didn't need to. Her presence alone grounded me in a way nothing else had since this began. "They'll be here," she said quietly, glancing at her watch. They always show up late. It's a power move. I nodded. I wasn't nervous, not in the way I thought I would be. My heart wasn't racing, my hands weren't shaking. What I felt was heavier than fear and steadier than anger. Readiness. A sharp click of heels echoed down the hallway, followed by voices I knew too well. I didn't look up at first. I didn't have to. My mother's voice carried before she came into view, tight, controlled, already vibrating with outrage. "There she is," she said, loud enough for people nearby to hear, sitting there like she's done nothing wrong. I lifted my gaze slowly. They stood a few feet away. My parents dressed in their version of seriousness. Neutral colors, polite expressions strained thin. Mara hovered just behind them, arms crossed, jaw tight. Josh stood beside her, stiff and pale, his confidence nowhere to be found. For a moment none of us spoke. Then my mother stepped forward. "Ava," she said sharply, "you need to end this now." Samantha stood immediately, positioning herself between us. "Any communication goes through me." My mother scoffed. "Oh, please, this is a family matter." "No," Samantha replied evenly. "This is a legal one." My father's face darkened. "You've turned your back on us," he said, his voice low and cutting. "After everything we've done for you." I felt the old reflex stir, the instinct to explain myself, to soften the blow. But it passed almost as quickly as it came. "You sold my home," I said calmly, "and you stole my money." Mara let out a sharp laugh, humorless and brittle. "You make it sound so dramatic." Samantha's eyes flicked to her. "Your sister's characterization doesn't change the facts." Josh finally spoke, his voice strained. "We didn't think it would get this far." I looked at him directly for the first time since the phone call. "That's because you didn't think I'd fight back." His mouth opened, then closed again. The courtroom doors opened before anyone could respond, and the bailiff called out our case number. The sound echoed down the hallway, drawing curious glances from strangers who had no idea they were about to witness the unmasking of a family. Inside, the courtroom felt colder. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense posture, took her seat and scanned the documents in front of her. "This hearing concerns an emergency injunction regarding the sale of a residential property and alleged financial misconduct," she said. "Counsel, you may proceed." Samantha stood. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and precise, "my client's parents and sister sold her penthouse without her consent while she was out of state. They used a restricted power of attorney intended solely for medical emergencies. The signature applied to the sale documents was forged. Additionally, funds from the sale and from my client's personal accounts were diverted to cover third-party debts." The judge raised an eyebrow and looked toward my family. "Is that so?" Their attorney, a man I'd never seen before with nervous eyes and a tie that felt too loud for the room, stood quickly. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. The parents believed they had authority. Belief is not law," the judge cut in. "Do you contest the claim of forgery?" The attorney hesitated. "We are still reviewing the documents." Samantha didn't miss a beat. She stepped forward and handed the clerk a folder. "We've provided bank statements, transaction histories, and preliminary expert analysis indicating the signature was traced, not signed." The judge flipped through the pages, her expression tightening. My mother gasped softly. "This is unbelievable," she whispered, loud enough to be heard. "She's destroying us." I didn't react. The judge looked up. "I'm inclined to grant the injunction pending further investigation," she said. "All proceeds from the sale and any related accounts will be frozen effective immediately." Josh stiffened beside Mara. My father stood abruptly. "You can't do that." The judge's gaze snapped to him. "Sit down, sir." He did. The gavel struck once, clean and final. "The injunction is granted. Further hearings will be scheduled." Just like that, the ground shifted. As people began to file out, My mother turned to me, her face flushed with fury. "How could you do this?" she hissed. "We're your parents." I met her eyes, my voice quiet but firm. "You stopped acting like parents when you decided my life was yours to trade." Mara stepped closer, her voice shaking with anger. "You think this makes you powerful? You think you've won?" I didn't raise my voice. "No, I think the truth finally caught up." Josh said nothing. He just stared at the floor. Outside the courtroom, the tension broke open like a dam. My mother cried openly now, clutching my father's arm. "We'll lose everything," she sobbed. "The house, the savings." My father's anger turned sharp and desperate. "You've ruined this family." I felt something unexpected then, not satisfaction, not revenge, just distance. "You ruined it yourselves," I said. "I just stopped covering for you." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the kind that came from regret. They were born of fear. "Josh could go to jail," she said. "Do you understand that?" I held her gaze. "He should have thought about that before using my money." Josh finally looked up. "Eva," he said quietly, "I never meant to hurt you." I didn't flinch. Intent doesn't erase impact. Samantha touched my arm gently. "We should go." As we walked away, my father called after me. "Don't expect anything from us after this." I turned once, slowly. I never did. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter, sharper, like breathing after being underwater too long. We sat in Samantha's car for a moment without speaking. Then she turned to me. "That was just the beginning," she said. "They'll try to settle. They'll try to negotiate. They'll try to pressure you emotionally." "I know," I replied. She studied my face. "You're holding up better than most." I looked out the window as the courthouse disappeared behind us. I think it's because I finally stopped hoping they'd change. The drive back to the motel passed in silence. My phone buzzed twice in my bag. I didn't check it. That night, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, replaying the day in my mind. The judge's voice, the look on Mara's face, the way my parents' authority crumbled the moment it met something stronger than guilt. For the first time, I understood something I'd spent my whole life missing. They weren't powerful because they were right. They were powerful because I let them be. And now, stripped of that permission, they were just people facing the consequences of their choices. I turned off the light and lay back, not with relief, but with resolve. The war wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. And this time, I wasn't standing alone. The first settlement offer arrived 3 days after the injunction, slid into my inbox like a polite insult dressed up as peace. I was sitting at the small table by the motel window, sunlight cutting across the carpet in thin stripes, when Samantha forwarded it to me with a single line. "Read this carefully, then breathe before you react." I opened the document. It was long, legal, carefully worded. My parents were willing to acknowledge procedural errors without admitting fault. They offered partial repayment of the funds taken from my account, spread out over time. In exchange, they wanted the case dropped, the injunction lifted, and all future claims waived. Josh's name appeared exactly once, as a non-primary beneficiary indirectly affected by the proceedings. My jaw tightened. They were still protecting him. I scrolled to the end. There it was, the line meant to hook me. In consideration of familial reconciliation, the defendants propose reinstating the plaintiff's status as beneficiary under the family estate. Inheritance. Again. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. They really thought this was leverage, that dangling future money would undo months of betrayal, theft, and humiliation. Samantha called less than a minute later. "They're testing you," she said. "This is their first attempt to regain control." "They didn't even apologize," I replied. "No," she agreed, "and they won't, not unless it benefits them." I closed the document. "We reject it." She paused. "You're sure?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. They're still lying, and they're still choosing him. Good, she said, because that tells me something. What? I asked. They're scared, she replied, but not scared enough yet. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. My parents' attorney sent revised offers. Each one slightly more generous, slightly more desperate. Larger repayments, faster timelines, still no admission of wrongdoing. Still silence on Josh's role. Mara tried a different approach. She showed up at the motel. I was just coming back from grabbing coffee when I saw her car parked crookedly near my door. My stomach dropped, but I didn't turn around. I kept walking. She stepped out as soon as she saw me, her face flushed, eyes rimmed red. "Eva, please," she called, "just talk to me." I stopped a few feet away, not stepping closer. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," she said quickly, "but I didn't know what else to do." I studied her, really looked at her. The familiar panic, the way she always looked when consequences finally reached her. "Josh's accounts are frozen," she said. "We can't pay anything. The wedding's on hold. His parents are furious." I said nothing. "He's not a bad person," she continued, voice trembling. "He just got in over his head." "You didn't," I said quietly. "You dragged me in with him." Her eyes filled with tears. "We thought you'd be okay. You always are." That sentence hit harder than any insult. "Being okay," I said, "is not the same as being untouched." She wiped at her face. "If you drop the case, we can fix this. We'll pay you back slowly, but—" "No," I said. She stared at me, stunned. "You won't even consider it?" "I have considered it," I replied. "For years. Every time I bailed you out. Every time I stayed quiet. This is the result." Her voice cracked. "He could lose everything." "So did I," I said. "And you laughed." She flinched. "I didn't. You called me homeless," I finished. "You mocked me, and now you want mercy." Her shoulders slumped. "I didn't think you'd fight." "I know," I said. She stood there for a long moment, then straightened, anger creeping in where panic had been. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I replied. "It makes me done." She left without another word. That night my phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. I answered. "This is Josh," he said, his voice low, controlled. "We need to have a real conversation." "We already did," I said. "No," he replied. "You talked, I listened. Now it's my turn." I almost laughed. "Go ahead." "I never forced your parents to do anything," he said. "They offered, they insisted, they said you owed them." My grip tightened on the phone. "And you accepted?" "Yes," he said simply, "because that's how your family works." There it was. Not denial, not guilt. Just entitlement. "You want to settle," he continued. "I can help. But if this goes to trial, things will come out that you might not like." "Is that a threat?" I asked calmly. "It's a warning," he replied. "Families don't survive this kind of exposure." "My family didn't survive it," I said. "They caused it." Silence. "You really think you'll walk away clean?" he said finally. "With your reputation intact?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I already have." I hung up and forwarded the call details to Samantha. Her reply was immediate. "Threats noted. That helps us more than you know." The next blow came from an unexpected place. My aunt called. She hadn't spoken to me in years, not since she'd quietly distanced herself from my parents after a similar conflict I'd never fully understood at the time. "I heard what's happening," she said softly. "I just wanted you to know." "You're not wrong." I swallowed. "They told everyone I was unstable." She sighed. "They did that to me too, years ago, when I wouldn't give them money." The pieces clicked together with a sickening clarity. "They never change," she continued. "They just rotate who they take from." After we hung up, I sat there in silence, absorbing the truth. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was generational, systemic, and I had been groomed to accept it as normal. Samantha called later that evening. "They're preparing for trial," she said. And so are we. What does that mean? I asked. It means depositions, she replied. Your parents, your sister, Josh, under oath. My chest tightened, not with fear but with anticipation. Good, I said. They won't like that, she warned. They shouldn't, I replied. The week before depositions was a study in unraveling. My parents' messages stopped entirely. No apologies, no pleas, just silence. The kind that usually meant they were plotting. Mara sent one last text. If this destroys everything, I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I didn't destroy anything. I stopped lying for you. Josh didn't contact me again. The day of depositions arrived gray and heavy. Samantha met me at her office, calm as ever. Remember, she said, they'll try to provoke you. Stay factual, stay grounded. I nodded. I will. I didn't sit in the room when my parents were questioned. I didn't need to. But when Samantha came out afterward, her expression told me everything. They contradicted themselves, she said, multiple times. And Josh? I asked. She exhaled slowly. He admitted he knew the funds weren't his. He admitted he knew you hadn't approved the sale. A strange feeling washed through me. Not triumph. Release. It's over, I whispered. Not yet, she corrected, but it's close. That night, alone in the motel room for what I knew would soon be the last time, I packed my suitcase slowly. Each folded shirt felt like closure. Each item returned to its place a quiet reclaiming of myself. They thought they could scare me with loss. They never understood that I had already survived it. And now, with the truth exposed and the lies collapsing under their own weight, the only thing left was the final reckoning. And this time, no one was coming to save them. The morning of the trial arrived without drama, without thunder, without any cinematic warning that something irreversible was about to happen. I woke before my alarm in the motel room, staring at the pale ceiling as dawn crept through the thin curtains. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't racing. They moved slowly, deliberately, like pieces finally settling into place. I showered, dressed, and packed the last of my things. Not because I expected closure by nightfall, but because I knew something would end today no matter what. Some version of my life would not survive the verdict, and I was ready to let it go. Samantha picked me up just after 7. She didn't fill the silence with reassurances or strategy. She didn't need to. The case was built, the evidence stacked neatly against the lies. What remained was simply the truth, spoken aloud in a room designed to measure it. The courthouse loomed larger than it had during the injunction hearing. Heavier, final. Inside, the air buzzed with low voices and shuffling papers. The trial wasn't sensational enough to draw a crowd, but there were enough curious eyes to make my parents uneasy. I could see it the moment they walked in. My mother looked smaller somehow, her posture stiff, her face drawn tight with something between rage and fear. My father avoided my gaze completely. Mara clung to Josh's arm, her jaw clenched so hard I wondered if it hurt. Josh looked different too, not confident, not smooth, just tired, cornered. We took our seats. When the judge entered, the room rose and fell in unison, and then it began. Samantha's opening statement was calm, precise, devastating in its restraint. She didn't dramatize, she didn't editorialize. She laid out a timeline so clear it felt almost surgical. The trust documents, the limited power of attorney, the forged signature, the rushed sale, the misrepresentation to the building management and buyers, the systematic transfers from my account to cover debts that weren't mine. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't have to. When the defense stood, their version of events sounded thin by comparison. Emotional appeals, family obligation, poor judgment under pressure. They spoke of love and desperation and intention, but intention doesn't erase consequence, and desperation doesn't excuse theft. The first witness called was the forensic document examiner. He explained the signature analysis in language so clear even the jurors leaned forward. He pointed out hesitation marks, pressure inconsistencies, traced curves. This signature, he said evenly, was not written, it was copied. Mara's hand trembled in Josh's grip. Next came the bank records. The analyst walked through the transfers month by month, showing how the amounts were structured to avoid detection, always under the threshold, always timed carefully, always justified with vague notes. My mother lowered her head. Josh stared straight ahead, unmoving. Then came the buyers of the penthouse, a quiet couple who had believed they were purchasing a property from cooperative parents helping a fragile adult child. She told us her daughter was emotionally unstable, the woman said softly, that it would be better if we didn't involve her. I felt something twist in my chest, but I stayed still. The courtroom felt colder after that. When it was my turn to testify, I stood without shaking. I told my story simply. No embellishment, no accusations. Just facts, memories, and the impact of discovering my life had been dismantled in my absence. I described stepping out of the rideshare to see my belongings on the sidewalk, the message calling me homeless, the disbelief, the humiliation. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The defense tried to trip me up, suggested I was exaggerating, suggested I'd been distant, suggested my parents had misunderstood my wishes. I answered every question calmly. I did not authorize the sale. I did not sign the document. I did not consent to my money being used. No drama, no cracks. Josh was called next. He looked uncomfortable as he took the stand, shifting in his seat as if the truth had physical weight. Under oath, the charm evaporated. Yes, he knew the money wasn't his. Yes, he knew I hadn't approved the sale. Yes, he accepted the help anyway. Because, as he said quietly, they told me it was handled. Handled. My parents were called after him. My mother cried, loudly, desperately. She spoke about fear, about protecting Mara, about believing I would be fine. I didn't think she needed that apartment, she said at one point, almost defensively. The courtroom went very still. My father tried a different tactic. Logic, authority. The idea that family resources were shared resources. She's our daughter, he said. We did what parents do. The judge's expression hardened. Parents do not forge signatures. Parents do not sell what isn't theirs. Parents do not strip their child of shelter and dignity and call it love. By the time Mara testified, there was nothing left to salvage. Her resentment showed through every answer. She spoke of entitlement without realizing it, of sacrifice without acknowledging who made it. When she admitted she had mocked me after the sale, the room shifted. The defense had no recovery from that. By late afternoon, closing arguments were delivered. Samantha spoke last. This case, she said, is not about family conflict. It is about abuse of trust, about control disguised as care, about what happens when one person is always expected to give and never allowed to say no. She looked toward the jury. My client did not destroy her family. She survived it. The jury deliberated longer than I expected. Hours passed. The light outside the courtroom shifted from gray to gold to dusk. When they returned, my pulse finally quickened. The foreperson stood, hands steady, in favor of the plaintiff, on fraud, on forgery, on financial exploitation, on emotional harm. Each count landed like a measured strike. The judge ordered restitution, full repayment, damages, legal fees, the sale voided, ownership restored. Josh's shoulders slumped. My mother sobbed openly. My father stared at the table as if it had betrayed him. Mara looked stunned, as though consequences were something that happened to other people. When it was over, when the courtroom emptied and the air finally moved again, Samantha squeezed my arm. "You did it," she said quietly. I shook my head. They did. Outside, my parents tried one last time. "This didn't have to happen," my mother cried. I met her gaze without anger. "It did," I said, "because you wouldn't stop." Josh didn't speak to me at all. Neither did Mara. As I walked down the courthouse steps, the weight I'd been carrying for years lifted. Not because I'd won, but because I had finally told the truth and let it stand on its own. Somewhere behind me, a family I thought I had was unraveling. But ahead of me was something I had never fully claimed before, myself, and that was enough. The movers came back on a quiet Tuesday morning, not with urgency or tension this time, but with calm efficiency, like they were returning something that had only been misplaced. I stood on the sidewalk across from my building, keys warm in my palm, watching them unload the last of my boxes from the truck. The city felt different now, not softer, clearer. The kind of clarity that comes after a storm has passed and you finally see what's been damaged and what survived. When I stepped back into the penthouse, the air smelled faintly stale, like a room that had been waiting. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, catching dust motes that floated lazily as if nothing had ever happened. The walls were the same. The windows still framed the river the way they always had. But I wasn't. I walked slowly, room to room, touching familiar surfaces. The kitchen counter where I used to drink coffee before work, the reading chair by the window, the spot near the balcony door where my suitcase had sat after so many trips. Every corner held a memory, but none of them hurt the way I expected. They felt earned. I set my bag down in the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence settle around me. Not the heavy silence of avoidance or tension, but the quiet that comes when no one is demanding anything from you. For the first time in my adult life, my phone didn't buzz with messages from my parents asking for help. It didn't light up with Mara's name and another crisis. It didn't carry Josh's voice, smooth and calculating, asking for time. The absence felt strange. Then it felt like relief. Samantha stopped by later that afternoon, a thin folder tucked under her arm. She didn't stay long, just enough to hand me the final documents and confirm what I already knew. "It's done," she said. "The funds are returned. The damages are paid. The case is closed." I nodded. "Thank you." She studied me for a moment. "You're handling this well." I smiled faintly. "I think I stopped grieving before the verdict." She nodded, understanding more than I said out loud. That's usually how it happens when someone's been carrying the weight alone for too long. After she left, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched out below me, alive and indifferent, the river catching the late afternoon light. I breathed in deeply and let it out slowly, feeling my shoulders drop for the first time in months. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. That evening, I unpacked slowly. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to be present for every small act of reclaiming. Each book returned to its shelf, each piece of clothing folded and put away, each familiar object finding its place again. When I reached the last box, I paused. Inside was a stack of old photographs I hadn't touched in years. Family holidays, birthdays, smiles that felt almost foreign now. I sat on the floor and flipped through them one by one, not with bitterness, but with a quiet kind of curiosity. I could see the pattern now, even in those frozen moments. The way I was always standing slightly apart. The way Mara leaned into the center. The way my parents' attention curved toward whoever needed them most in that moment. I set the photos aside and closed the box. Some memories didn't need to be destroyed. They just didn't get to define me anymore. The next message from my mother came 3 days later. Just one sentence. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long moment before setting the phone face down on the counter. I didn't reply, not out of spite, not out of anger, but because happiness wasn't something I owed an explanation for. Mara never reached out again. Neither did Josh. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard bits and pieces. The wedding quietly canceled, the debts still looming, my parents selling their house to cover what the court ordered. For a while, I felt a flicker of guilt. Then I remembered the movers on the sidewalk. The message calling me homeless. The laughter in Mara's voice. The ease with which my parents had signed my name. The guilt passed. Karma didn't arrive with fireworks or cruelty. It arrived with balance. Weeks turned into months. Life settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first. Peaceful, predictable, mine. I started saying no without rehearsing at first. I stopped over-explaining my choices. I learned that rest didn't need to be earned through exhaustion. One evening, as I sat on the balcony watching the city lights come on, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had been useful. It had given me momentum when I needed it most. But now it felt unnecessary, like armor worn long after the battle had ended. What remained was something quieter, self-respect, the kind that doesn't shout or demand validation, the kind that simply exists, steady and unmovable. I thought about the version of myself who had always believed love meant sacrifice, who thought being strong meant absorbing everything so no one else had to feel uncomfortable, who confused endurance with worth. I wished I could reach back and tell her one thing. You're allowed to choose yourself. That night, I slept with the balcony door open, the sounds of the city drifting in like a reminder that the world was bigger than the small, suffocating roles I had once been assigned. In the morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own home, with nothing to prove and no one to rescue. And that was more than enough. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want you to know something. This wasn't just about a penthouse, or money, or betrayal. It was about boundaries. About what happens when you stop letting people rewrite your reality because they're family. About the quiet strength it takes to stand still while others try to pull you back into patterns that no longer serve you. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if you found value here, if this journey resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. More stories are coming. Stories about betrayal, justice, karma, and the power of choosing yourself when it matters most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the strongest revenge isn't what you take back, but what you finally refuse to give away again.